First time someone asked you why you never learned Spanish, you probably froze. Your face flushed hot. You didn't have an answer ready. Maybe you were at a party. An older relative had cupped your chin and spoken a fast, warm sentence full of rolled R's, and you had to mumble back, in English, that you didn't understand. You saw the flicker of confusion in their eyes, then the slow nod, then the mild, disappointed shrug. You wanted to sink through the floor. Later, you might have told yourself it was just a language. You could learn it if you cared enough. But that little lie didn't stop the knot in your stomach. The real reason you can't speak Spanish is not laziness or a lack of interest. It is a scar your family has carried for over a century. And you got handed that scar before you could even talk. Your parents didn't keep Spanish from you out of neglect. They kept it from you out of a love so fierce it warped into silence. To understand that silence, you have to walk into a small, dusty school on the US Mexico border in the year 1930. The chalkboard is dusty. The teacher stands at the front with a wooden ruler in her hand. A little girl in braids accidentally murmurs a word in Spanish to her friend. The teacher hears it. The ruler slams down on the desk. That evening, the girl goes home with swollen knuckles. This is not an isolated story. It happened thousands of times in thousands of classrooms across Texas, Arizona, California, and beyond. At the height of the Americanization movement, English-only laws swept the country. In 1918, Texas passed a statute making it a criminal offense for teachers to use any language other than English in instruction. Arizona followed with a similar law. California embedded its own English-only mandate in the state education code. Historian Guadalupe San Miguel Jr. has spent his career documenting what came next. He calls it subtractive schooling. The goal was not to add a second language. The goal was to erase Spanish from a child's mind entirely, and the methods were brutal and creative. A 1970 federal report called The Excluded Student compiled hundreds of official complaints and interviews. Children were forced to kneel on uncooked rice. The sharp grains burrowed into their skin. Some schools set up what they called a Spanish detention room. Kids would be locked inside for hours, repeating English phrases until their voices cracked. Paddling was common. One elderly woman, interviewed late in life, recalled a teacher who would strike her palm with a ruler every time she lapsed into Spanish. The report found that in some schools, students were rewarded for snitching on classmates who spoke Spanish in the halls. Friends would turn on friends. The system turned language into a crime and children into informants. Over months, the children learned a deep, bone-level lesson. Spanish meant pain. Spanish meant shame. To be safe, to be accepted, to be American, you had to kill that part of yourself. And many did. They grew up, got jobs, started families, and made a silent vow they would not let their own children go through that. They would protect them by cutting the Spanish out at the root. In thousands of homes, parents who spoke Spanish to each other turned and addressed their toddlers in only English. They gave you, their child, the gift of safety. A gift that meant you would never know the sting of a ruler, never taste the soap rubbed on your tongue, never kneel on rice until your knees bled. But it was a gift wrapped in loss. Researcher Patricia Gandara has studied this pattern for decades. She calls it the linguistic trauma cycle. Parents who were physically punished for their mother tongue developed a visceral, almost physical terror of passing it on. It was not a conscious decision discussed over dinner. It lived in the body, a tightness in the throat when a family member said a word in Spanish. The need to change the subject. A flinch. Maybe you saw that flinch in your own mother. You once asked her to teach you a word in Spanish, and she smiled and looked away. You didn't understand why. Now you do. And for many years, their sacrifice seemed to work. Their children didn't get beaten in school for speaking Spanish. They learned English perfectly. They glided through hallways without fear. But a quiet cost was piling up, a cost that lands squarely on your shoulders today. By the time you were born, the world had spun on its axis. Bilingualism stopped being a stigma and became a superpower. Employers started listing Spanish as a desired skill. By 2020, Spanish fluency could boost a worker's salary by thousands of dollars a year. Universities valued it. And within the Latino community, the language underwent a revival of pride. Suddenly, Spanish was not just a way to talk to your abuela. It was a ticket to belonging. You grew up sensing that. You heard the music at family gatherings. You ate the tamales and the arroz con palo. You felt the love in the loud, laughing stories. But the words remained a locked door. And then one day, someone realized you didn't have the key. Maybe it was a cousin. Maybe it was a stranger on the internet. They asked you to say something in Spanish, and you panicked. You babbled out a few words with a gringo accent, and they laughed. They called you a no Sabo Kid. The phrase is a mockery of a common mistake. A young child trying to express the idea, I don't know might incorrectly say no Sabo instead of the correct no say. On TikTok and Twitter, the label spread. It became shorthand for a Latino who is not really Latino, a person whose roots are shallow, a cultural fake. What does that even mean? Not really Latino. Is it a verb form, a genetic code, a memory of a lullaby? A recent Pew Research Center study found that nearly half of non Spanish speaking Latinos report being shamed by other Latinos for their language skills. Linguist Vanessa Diaz has documented the emotional toll of this mockery. She found that it pushes many young Latinos into a spiral of shame and isolation, often making them withdraw from the very community that mocked them. The sting is a special kind of hurt because it comes from your own people, from the very community that was supposed to be your refuge. So here you are. You can't escape the judgment. Your parents look at you with a confusion that cuts almost as deep. They gave up a part of their soul to keep that ruler off your skin. They live with the ghost of those swollen knuckles. And now they see you shamed for the same absence they carved out of love. You are locked in a perfect double bind. If they had taught you Spanish, you might have faced the rage of a system that has not fully healed its old hatred. But because they didn't, you face the rejection of your own culture. There is no way out that doesn't hurt. That knot in your chest when someone rattles off a conversation in Spanish, that is not your personal failing. That is a scar passed down from a century of paddles and rice in dark detention rooms. It is a scar from a system that tried to scrub your family's voice from the earth. And it is the shape of a love so desperate it burned its own tongue.
Yeah.
Understanding this does not make the knot disappear overnight. It does not silence the mocking TikToks. It does not give you back the lullabies you never heard. But it does something quiet and powerful. It redirects the blame. You can stop blaming your parents. They were warriors who took the beating inside themselves so you would never have to flinch. You can stop blaming yourself. You are not broken. You are a carrier of a complex, painful history that most people never bother to understand. So what can you do with this inheritance? Some people choose to learn Spanish now, not to prove anything to the mockers, but as a deliberate act of reclamation. Every new verb they stumble over is a tiny rebellion against the old English-only laws. They fill their mouths with the words their grandparents were beaten for speaking. And somehow, that turns the shame into something almost like triumph. Others choose a different path. They anchor their identity in food, in dance, in the stories they can understand. They learn to say, I am still of this culture, even without the language. That is also valid. The only wrong move is to stay frozen in a shame that was never yours to carry. So the next time someone leans in and asks you why you never learned Spanish, you won't freeze. You will know the answer. You can tell them, calmly, that your grandparents were beaten for whispering it in school. That your parents, terrified and loving, chose silence as your shield. And that you are not a no Sabo kid. You are the quiet, breathing aftermath of a 100-year battle. And the very sound of your living voice in any language is the victory they never got to hear. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our channel. A new story every week.